The canvas. It all started at an unassuming estate auction. The room buzzed with excitement as antique furniture and forgotten heirlooms were auctioned off. But one item caught my eye, an old painting, hidden beneath layers of dust and grime. Something about it drew me in, and before I knew it, I had raised my hand, securing the painting for an unexpectedly low bid. When the painting arrived at my apartment, I eagerly unwrapped it, revealing a dark, unsettling scene. It depicted a shadowy forest, twisted trees clawing at a blood-red sky. In the center stood a solitary figure, its features obscured, but its eyes, cold and piercing, seemed to follow me. I shrugged off the chill running down my spine, blaming it on my imagination. That night, I had the first of many restless sleeps. Shadows seemed to move in my peripheral vision, and strange noises echoed through the apartment. I awoke several times, heart pounding, convinced that someone, or something, was watching me. By morning, I was exhausted but dismissed the experience as the result of an overactive mind. Curious about the painting's origins, I reached out to a local art historian. Dr. Margaret Hayes was a stern but knowledgeable woman, and she agreed to examine the painting. Her reaction was immediate and unsettling. "This painting," she said, "is cursed. It's known as the Wraith of the Woods and has a dark history of driving its owners to madness." Dr. Hayes explained that the painting was created by a deranged artist named Eliza Gray, who was rumored to have made a pact with dark forces. Each owner of the painting had met a tragic end, either through mysterious disappearances or violent deaths. Skeptical but intrigued, I decided to keep the painting, determined to uncover its secrets. The nightmares intensified. Each night, I dreamt of the forest from the painting. The twisted trees seemed to close in on me, and the figure in the center grew more distinct, its eyes blazing with malice. I would wake up drenched in sweat, the figure's gaze lingering in my mind long after I opened my eyes. During the day, I began to notice a presence in my apartment. Objects moved on their own, and cold spots would appear without warning. Once, I heard a faint whispering, like a distant conversation, but when I tried to listen closer, it would fade into silence. The feeling of being watched grew unbearable. Desperate for answers, I invited a medium, Clara, to conduct a séance. As we sat around the painting, candles flickering, the temperature dropped sharply. Clara's eyes rolled back, and she began speaking in a voice that wasn't her own. The spirit of Eliza Gray warned me to return the painting to its original location or face dire consequences. Determined to end the haunting, I began researching Eliza Gray's life and discovered she had lived in a remote cabin deep in the woods. The location matched the forest in the painting. Gathering my courage, I decided to visit the cabin, hoping to uncover a way to lift the curse. With a map in hand and a sense of foreboding, I set out for the forest. The journey was treacherous, the path overgrown and barely visible. As I ventured deeper into the woods, the atmosphere grew oppressive, and the trees seemed to close in around me. I could almost feel the eyes of the figure in the painting watching my every move. I finally reached the cabin, a dilapidated structure barely standing amidst the encroaching forest. Inside, dust and decay reigned supreme. I found a small, hidden room with an altar, covered in strange symbols and candles long since burned out. In the center lay a journal, Eliza Gray's final testament. The journal revealed Eliza's descent into madness. She had indeed made a pact with dark forces, offering her soul in exchange for artistic inspiration. But the price was steep. The painting became a vessel for the malevolent spirit that now haunted me. The only way to break the curse was to destroy the painting within the forest where it was conceived. I gathered the necessary items for the ritual described in the journal: salt, candles, and a knife. As night fell, I set up the ritual site in a clearing near the cabin. The air was thick with anticipation, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. I placed the painting on the ground and began the incantation. As the ritual progressed, the figure in the painting began to move, stepping out of the canvas and into the clearing. It was Eliza's spirit, twisted and malevolent. She attacked, a whirlwind of rage and darkness. I fought back, chanting the incantation louder, determined to banish her once and for all. The battle was fierce. Shadows swirled around us, and the forest itself seemed to come alive. Eliza's spirit clawed at me, trying to drag me into the painting. But I held firm, using the knife to cut a circle of protection around me. With a final, desperate incantation, I thrust the knife into the painting, tearing it apart. The forest went silent as the painting disintegrated, Eliza's spirit screaming and dissolving into nothingness. Exhausted and battered, I collapsed to the ground, the weight of the curse lifting from my shoulders. The oppressive atmosphere faded, replaced by an eerie calm. I returned home, leaving the remains of the painting and the cursed forest behind. My apartment felt different, lighter. The strange occurrences ceased, and the nightmares stopped. I finally slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, free from the eyes of the malevolent spirit. Life slowly returned to normal. I focused on work and reconnecting with friends and family. The experience left me wary of anything remotely connected to the occult, but it also made me appreciate the mundane, everyday moments that I had once taken for granted. Years passed, and the memory of the cursed painting faded into the background. I kept Eliza's journal as a reminder of the ordeal, tucked away in a safe place. Occasionally, I would think back to the auction, wondering how many others had been tempted by the painting's dark allure. One day, I decided to return to the forest to ensure that no trace of the painting remained. The cabin had collapsed, overtaken by nature. I buried the remains of the journal and any lingering artifacts, hoping to finally lay Eliza's spirit to rest. As I left the forest, I felt a sense of closure, knowing that the curse had been broken and the haunting had come to an end. The curses. I received the letter on a rainy afternoon. My great-uncle, a man I barely remembered, had passed away and left me his estate. The letter was vague, mentioning an old house filled with valuable antiques. Curious and excited by the prospect, I decided to visit the house the next day. The house was a crumbling Victorian mansion, standing alone at the edge of a thick forest. It was as if time had forgotten it. Stepping inside, I was struck by the heavy silence and the smell of dust and decay. The air was thick with an unsettling feeling that I couldn't quite place. Among the many antiques, one piece stood out, a large, foreboding painting hung in the living room. It depicted a woman with hollow eyes standing in a dark forest, similar to the one behind the house. Her gaze seemed to follow me around the room, and I felt an immediate sense of dread. That night, I was awakened by a soft, almost imperceptible whisper. I sat up, straining to hear. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the living room. Gathering my courage, I crept downstairs, but the whispers ceased as soon as I entered the room. The painting seemed darker and more menacing in the moonlight. The next day, I found an old diary in my great-uncle's study. It belonged to the house's original owner, a man named Elias Grayson. The entries became increasingly erratic, detailing his obsession with the painting and the dark rituals he performed to capture the spirit of his deceased wife within it. The last entry was a chilling warning: the spirit is restless. Beware the curse. The following nights were plagued by shadows moving in the corners of my vision and cold spots in the house. Objects began to shift inexplicably. I tried to dismiss these as my imagination, but the painting's eyes seemed to grow darker and more intense with each passing day. One evening, I heard footsteps echoing through the empty halls. I followed the sound, heart pounding, to find the painting's frame rattling violently. A chill ran down my spine as a disembodied voice whispered my name. Panic surged through me, and I fled the room, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. Desperate for answers, I contacted a local historian who specialized in the occult. She agreed to visit the house, intrigued by its dark history. When she arrived, she immediately sensed the malevolent presence and warned me that the spirit within the painting was growing stronger, feeding on my fear. Together, we searched the house and found an old, dusty book hidden behind a false panel in the library. It contained detailed instructions for a ritual to banish the spirit. The historian explained that the ritual required a blood sacrifice and must be performed at midnight during a new moon, which was only days away. We prepared for the ritual, gathering the necessary items and studying the incantations. As midnight approached, the atmosphere in the house grew oppressive. We began the ritual, but the spirit fought back with a fury we were unprepared for. Shadows swirled around us, and the historian was thrown across the room, knocking her unconscious. I barely managed to drag her out of the house. While the historian recovered, I delved deeper into Elias Grayson's diary. He had performed unspeakable acts in his desperation to bring his wife back, ultimately trapping her angry spirit in the painting. The more I read, the more I understood the depth of the curse and the danger we were in. Once the historian recovered, she suggested we seek out a powerful psychic she knew. The psychic, an elderly woman named Margot, agreed to help, warning us that the spirit was extremely dangerous and vengeful. She believed we had one last chance to perform the ritual correctly. Margot instructed us to prepare the house by cleansing it with sage and setting up protective charms. We spent the next 2 days following her instructions meticulously. The house felt lighter, but the painting's malevolent presence remained palpable. On the night of the new moon, we gathered in the living room, tension thick in the air. Margot began the ritual, her voice strong and unwavering. As we chanted, the room grew colder, and the shadows around the painting deepened. The spirit manifested a twisted version of the woman in the painting, screaming in rage. Margot cut her palm, letting the blood drip onto the painting. The spirit shrieked, thrashing violently. The historian and I held our ground, repeating the incantations. The room shook, and for a moment, it felt like the very walls would collapse. But then, a blinding light enveloped the painting. The light grew brighter, consuming the spirit's form. With a final, agonized scream, the spirit was pulled back into the painting, which then exploded into a cloud of dust and ash. The oppressive weight lifted from the room, and the house fell silent. We collapsed in exhaustion. The ordeal was finally over. The historian and Margot assured me that the spirit was truly gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling of lingering unease. The house felt different and lighter, but I knew the memories of the haunting would stay with me forever. I decided to sell the house, unable to live with the memories of what had transpired. I contacted a real estate agent and began the process of clearing out the remaining antiques. The historian and I stayed in touch, bonded by our shared experience. I moved to a new city, leaving the haunted past behind. Life slowly returned to normal, though I remained wary of anything that seemed too good to be true. The historian published a book about the ordeal, bringing attention to the dark history of the house and the dangers of tampering with the unknown. 1 year later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small, unmarked painting depicting a familiar dark forest. The sight of it sent chills down my spine. I knew then that the curse was not entirely broken and that the past had a way of catching up with us. The spirit might have been banished, but the darkness it left behind was still very much alive. The portrait. I first heard about the painting when my grandmother's will was read. She had left me a sizable inheritance, but with one peculiar condition: I had to take possession of a painting that had been in the family for generations. My grandmother had always been a superstitious woman, and I wondered if this painting held some significance. I soon discovered it was more than just an heirloom, it was a curse. The painting arrived at my apartment a week later, encased in a dusty, ornate frame. It depicted an elderly woman with piercing blue eyes and a stern expression. My grandmother had always referred to her as Eleanor. Something was unnerving about Eleanor's gaze, as if she were watching my every move. That first night, I had trouble sleeping. Her eyes seemed to follow me even after I turned off the lights. The next day, I noticed things in my apartment weren't quite right. Small items, like my keys and phone, were missing and then found in odd places. I tried to brush it off as my forgetfulness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor's painting had something to do with it. Her eyes seemed to twinkle with a knowing malice. That night, the nightmares began. I dreamt of Eleanor standing at the foot of my bed, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. Her eyes bored into mine, and I woke up drenched in sweat, her whispers still echoing in my ears. I decided to move the painting to the attic, hoping the distance would give me some peace. With the painting upstairs, the atmosphere in my apartment grew heavier. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and I often felt a cold presence behind me. One evening, while I was cooking dinner, I saw a shadowy figure in the corner of my eye. When I turned, there was nothing there. But I could feel Eleanor's presence stronger than ever. Desperate for answers, I visited the local library to research my family history. I discovered that Eleanor had been a distant relative who dabbled in dark magic. She had been shunned by the family and eventually died under mysterious circumstances. Rumor had it that she cursed the painting with her spirit, vowing to torment her descendants. I contacted a local historian who specialized in the occult. She explained that Eleanor's curse was likely tied to the painting and that breaking it would require a ritual. She gave me a list of items needed and warned me that the process would be dangerous. I was determined to be rid of Eleanor's malevolent spirit, no matter the cost. Gathering the required items was no easy task. I had to find rare herbs, candles, and an old family heirloom, a locket that had belonged to Eleanor. As I prepared for the ritual, the haunting grew worse. Eleanor's presence became almost tangible, her whispers louder and more insistent. She knew what I was planning and was determined to stop me. I set up the ritual in my living room, candles casting flickering shadows on the walls. As I began to chant the incantation, the temperature dropped, and a fierce wind howled through the room. The shadows coalesced into Eleanor's form, her eyes burning with fury. I faltered, and the ritual failed. Eleanor's laughter echoed through the apartment, and I knew she had grown stronger. Shaken, I reached out to a renowned psychic medium named Margot, who agreed to help me. She arrived the next day, immediately sensing the dark energy surrounding the painting. Margot confirmed that Eleanor's spirit was deeply entrenched and that we needed to combine our efforts to banish her once and for all. Margot and I prepared for a second ritual, this time with stronger protections in place. As we began, Eleanor's spirit manifested again, more violent and malevolent. The room shook, and objects flew off shelves. Margot chanted louder, urging me to stay focused. The air grew thick with Eleanor's presence, but we pressed on, determined to break the curse. Amid the chaos, Eleanor's ghostly form lunged at me. I stood my ground, holding the locket aloft and reciting the final incantation. There was a blinding flash of light, and Eleanor let out a blood-curdling scream. The painting shattered, and her spirit was sucked into the void, leaving behind an eerie silence. With Eleanor banished, the oppressive atmosphere in my apartment lifted. Margot assured me that the curse was broken, but warned that residual energy might linger. Exhausted but relieved, I thanked her for her help. The shattered remains of the painting were a stark reminder of the ordeal I had endured. Life slowly returned to normal, though I remained wary of Eleanor's lingering presence. I donated the remains of the painting to the historian for further study, hoping it would prevent anyone else from falling victim to Eleanor's curse. I kept the locket as a reminder of the battle I had fought and won. Although the haunting had ceased, I still experienced occasional cold spots and flickers of shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor's spirit, though banished, was not completely gone. Margot suggested it might take time for the residual energy to dissipate entirely. One night, I awoke to find the locket glowing faintly. It was a sign that Eleanor's spirit was trying to return. Margot had warned me that powerful spirits often leave behind traces of their essence, seeking to reclaim their hold. I knew I had to act quickly to prevent her from regaining strength. I dove back into research, looking for a permanent solution to rid myself of Eleanor's presence. I discovered an ancient binding ritual that required a powerful artifact to trap her spirit forever. The artifact, a mirror said to reflect and contain spirits, was rumored to be hidden in a nearby abandoned mansion. The mansion was a decrepit, eerie place, rumored to be haunted itself. As I explored its dark corridors, I felt Eleanor's presence growing stronger, her whispers urging me to turn back. I pressed on, determined to find the mirror. Finally, in a hidden chamber, I discovered it, a large, ornate mirror covered in dust. Back at my apartment, I prepared for the binding ritual. I positioned the mirror in front of the locket, creating a focal point for Eleanor's spirit. As I chanted the incantation, the locket's glow intensified, and Eleanor's spirit emerged, raging against the pull of the mirror. With one final effort, I completed the ritual, and Eleanor's spirit was sucked into the mirror, trapped behind its reflective surface. The air in my apartment was finally clear, and the oppressive weight lifted. I felt a profound sense of relief, knowing that Eleanor's spirit was contained forever. I sealed the mirror in a secure location, ensuring it could never be tampered with. Life returned to normal, and I was finally free from the curse that had haunted me. Though the experience had scarred me, it also made me stronger, and more aware of the unseen forces that linger in the shadows.